Welcome to another episode of Erik Wait Whiskey Studies, and we're continuing my series on the business of Scotch whiskey. In this video, we're going to talk about the environmental impact of the Scotch whiskey industry and how important it is for the Scotch whiskey industry to be environmentally minded. As I go over my notes, I'm going to be enjoying a dram of the Laphroaig 10 cask strength. This is batch 10 from 2018. I've already reviewed this whiskey, so if you want the full notes, you want to check out my other video. This is not like the regular Laphroaig 10. If you're familiar with the regular Laphroaig 10 and you think a cask strength is basically the same profile but bigger, you would be wrong. This is really a much more complex whiskey. Really absolutely fantastic. Probably, potentially, one of my top 10 for 2019. Alrighty, so one of the most important things in whiskey is water. Not just in terms of, we like to add a little bit of water to our whiskey, right, to bring down the proof a little bit or to enhance some of the flavors, but rather in the entire production process of making Scotch whiskey. And in Scotland, they get a whole lot of rain, and that rain goes into making Scotch whiskey. Water is one of the most important resources for any whiskey distillery, as it is used throughout the production process and it affects the quality and flavor. So water is used in a number of different ways in the Scotch whiskey production. It's used for cleaning, it's used for cooling, but it's also used in the mash for doing fermentation, and when the distiller wants to take from cask strength to a more bottling strength, say take it down from, let's say around 60% ABV down to say 46 ABV, they're going to want to use the best, highest quality water in that as well. So water is really important in making Scotch whiskey. However, there are some distilleries that make some pretty, I would say, wild claims about the importance of their water and the impact it has on the flavors of their whiskey. Yeah, I think water does, good quality water does have an impact on flavor, but how much?
Here we are, about 500 feet above the distillery in the hills, and this is the water supply for Laphroaig. The Kilbride stream you can hear behind us, and behind that the dam and the Kilbride Reservoir. 5 million gallons of water are kept in here, and this gives the distillery the supply it needs all year round. Now in the glass here, this isn't whiskey, this is the water supply. This is the liquid from the Kilbride Reservoir. You can see there's a lot of sediment, a lot of colour. 15% of the flavour from the whiskey will actually come from the water supply. So it's really crucial we have a nice soft peaty water to keep the flavour profile the same. So here we are in the Kilbride stream on its way to the distillery, and this part behind us here, which you see, plays a big part in the Laphroaig's history. Recently, this land has now been used to become the plots for the Friends of Laphroaig too. So the peated water supply is one of the things that makes us unique.
Now, I actually seriously doubt that any peat from the water is making it through fermentation and then distillation and then make it in here. The peat character, I mean, there's so much peat character in this. Even if there was some minuscule amount that somehow was making it through all that, the peat character from this whiskey comes from the peat in peating the barley. Laphroaig's a little bit different in terms of their peat than from other distilleries. When they're sprouting barley, when it's become malted and it's still a little bit wet, they put sort of a cool peat smoke through it, which then clings to the barley. So they're not drying their barley with peat smoke. They actually just do an air dry, as a lot of other distilleries do, but they're doing a sort of a wet peating, which is why Laphroaig has a very distinctive character from their neighbors Lagavulin and Ardbeg. So this whiskey has some classic Laphroaig character to it in terms of the intensity of the peat smoke and some of the medicinal notes on the nose, but it's got some savory notes in there as well, which I don't typically expect from a Laphroaig. It has a chocolate covered mint, definitely some pepper. It has some barbecue charred meat character to it. That's probably more of that savory character to it. It has some vanilla, loads of chocolate. I'm going to take a couple more steps and I'll give you some notes on this. After we get into some of the environmental recycling of distilleries, one unique one being at Bowmore. There are several aspects to the production that require water to be heated and cooled. This can obviously use a lot of energy, adding to costs. Distilleries are now becoming much more efficient by finding ways to reuse excess heat from the production process. One famous example is the swimming pool at Bowmore on Islay, which is heated by waste heat from Bowmore Distillery right next to the swimming pool. When I had first heard about Bowmore Distillery in the town of Bowmore, which is sort of in the heart of Islay, recycling their heat for a swimming pool, I thought to myself, who's gonna, hey, I'm gonna grab my swimming trunks and go swimming at Bowmore Distillery. No one's going swimming at the Bowmore Distillery. I can't imagine, hey, let's do a tour of the distillery, and then we'll put on our swimming trunks, and then we'll go hang out by the pool and enjoy a dram. Rather, there's sort of I would call it more of like a recreational center, as you saw there in the video. So the heat is used for the neighborhood swimming pool, and if you saw there, it's indoors because Islay doesn't necessarily have the best weather for going swimming. Even in the middle of summertime, even on a sunny day, that water in the ocean is really, really, really cold, and so I don't think too many people. In fact, I seriously doubt anyone on Islay would have a swimming pool in their backyard. In fact, one of the concerns that they actually had was, since people don't go swimming in the ocean because it's too dang cold, and people don't have swimming pools because it's you don't really get the weather for it, that consequently people aren't learning how to swim. And for a safety factor, if nothing else, recreation and all that, people should know how to swim. And so in creating this swimming pool, it gives people the opportunity to, in a warm water, to learn how to swim. Not just for recreation, but for safety as well. So that's really, really, really cool. It's really, really cool that the distillery is reusing heat in this fashion. Other distilleries are doing other things. So, for example, Bruichladdich, they use their draft and fermentation waste to make a biofuel, and they actually have a car on the premises that runs on their biofuel. So that's another way that distilleries are being sort of more environmentally conscious.
Distillation produces two waste streams. By the process of anaerobic digestion, which is basically a bunch of little bugs eating away at the organic material in the watery waste, and that biogas can then be burnt in an engine, and that engine can turn an alternator, and that alternator can create electricity. That produces enough electricity to power the whole distillery. Every morning I drop off my son Rosie at school, driving along the Atlantic coast. It's 8 miles here and it's 8 miles back. I can do that all on one charge a week, and in total silence. It's glorious.
The Scotch Whisky Association has developed a policy since 2009 and has been implementing it voluntarily with the distilleries to get everybody on board for being more environmentally conscious. So let's go over my notes on that. In 2009, the Scotch Whisky Association launched its first annual environmental strategy report. These are in line with the Scottish Government's ambitious 2020 plans to reduce energy and CO2 emissions.
The industry environmental strategy is a clear signal to governments, supply chain and stakeholders about the industry's bold intentions and strong ambitions in the environmental field between now and 2050. It's a collective strategy that pulls together individual companies' ambitions and adds them together in a way that makes them greater than the sum of their parts.
Well, I think from the perspective of the Scottish Forum and Natural Capital, we're very pleased to see the Scotch whisky industry taking a leadership role. And I think through the role they have in the Scottish economy, they can influence show leadership. They've got a lot of stakeholders and supply chains. So I think there's a huge force for good through the Scottish economy.
The Scotch whisky industry has been a leader in innovation and sustainability since 2009. So for ourselves in farming and crofting, and myself representing NFUS Scotland, it's very interesting to see the impact it's had in that industry, and it's an incentive for ourselves to do something similar, to really be part of that journey towards being more sustainable and innovative.
This strategy is really important because it's an example of an industry setting out their own challenging objectives, going beyond what's required by regulation, and setting out an agenda for good environmental stewardship, which is really impressive.
Scotch whisky really matters to our economy. It really matters to the supply chain and the communities that support the Scotch whisky industry. They all sit in the natural environment, and whisky draws from that environment. It's important to all of those aspects.
We absolutely encourage the industry to embrace circular economy opportunities and to look for high value applications for its byproducts. Some of the key points from Zero Waste Scotland's perspective is that this is really the industry leading the way and taking responsibility. The Scotch Whisky Association and the industry have looked at where they can make the biggest impact and have set targets accordingly in a way that is achievable for the rest of the industry to get behind.
One of the key aspects of this strategy is the emphasis on a thriving natural environment. The strategy says that a thriving natural environment is vital to Scotch whisky, and we in SNH agree entirely with that sentiment. We've been working with the Whisky Association for years on their environmental sustainability, and in 2009 SNH awarded them an award for their excellence in environmental sustainability. So it's great to see that the commitment has been long-term and that it's time for a refresh and to set forward a more forward-looking agenda for the future.
I think that it goes further than previous iterations of the strategy in recognising the importance of sustainable land use and the supply chain. Whisky is heavily dependent on barley and water. The catch line that whisky depends on a thriving natural environment is absolutely key, and turning that into sustainable land use is very important. That's a challenge for the future.
Scotch whisky industry's been here for 500 years. This strategy will help future-proof the industry for 500 more, because it helps the industry compete in a really global and competitive environment. And we're a growing industry with 10 or so new distilleries opening in the last 2 years. Those are mature companies, mature distilleries, will realign themselves behind this long-term strategy, and that's good for the environment and good for long-term business.
One of the targets of 2009 was to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions to the atmosphere through innovation and adoption of relevant technologies. The progress by 2014, emissions per unit of energy had fallen by 13% by 2008. Total emissions have fallen by 1% since 2008. Another target was to increase energy efficiency in the production process, and by 2014, distilleries and warehouses improved energy efficiency by 2% since 2008. Packaging operations improved energy efficiency by 20% since 2008. Another target was by 2020, 20% of the industry's primary energy requirements would come from non-fossil fuels. By 2014, 17% of energy is coming from non-fossil fuels, up 3% since 2008. Another target was to manage water requirements effectively, engage actively with the SEPA and other relevant authorities in the development of Scotland's river basin management plans to ensure a sustainable and good quality water supply. By 2014, net water use was down by 14% since 2008. Another target was by 2020 to reduce by 10% the average unit weight of product packaging materials. The weight has decreased by 1% since 2008. By 2020, 40% of product packaging to be from recycled materials, and by 2014, recycled content of product packaging is up from 29% in 2012 to 33% in 2014. Another target was by 2020, no waste from packaging operations would go to landfills. By 2014, 2% goes to landfill. This is from 13% in 2008. Another target was to seek to ensure that all casks brought into the industry are made from oak sourced from sustainable forests. And the SWA reports that they have positive support from their stakeholders. Another target was to work with supply chain stakeholders to encourage the adoption of high environmental standards and relevant sustainable practices. And the SWA reports in 2014 that they are working closely with stakeholders is core to the delivery of their strategy. And finally, one of the targets is to report annually to the stakeholders on their progress to demonstrate how they are meeting their requirements and delivering against their targets. And in 2014, the SWA reports they are reporting regularly since 2008. Super, super, super intense flavors. I mean, really, really dense and concentrated. It has a little bit of a tingle there from the alcohol. But it's actually got a nice sort of velvety, silky mouthfeel. Almost creamy. Now, I'm about halfway through the bottle, so it's developed a lot since I originally opened it. But mostly what I'm getting is I'm getting that sort of charred meat character, but also getting sort of a chocolate and mint character, like a York's peppermint patty. And I would say that's pretty classic for a Laphroaig, particularly on the Laphroaig 10. The Laphroaig 10, the regular bottle, I start getting that once I get past the shoulder. That winter mint, that mint character really sticks through there. Obviously, got a lot of smoke, got a lot of peat, got a lot of that chocolate character to it. And probably like grilled fruit notes. Maybe a little bit of black fruit as well. And then on the back end, I get some spice, some pepper. So it's really, 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 really nice. So I'll do a whole nother video on this, on the new distilleries that are popping up in Scotland. But one of the things that a lot of the new distilleries are doing is from the very get-go, rather than having to retrofit the distillery, they're starting off with a distillery that is environmentally conscious. And so, and following with the 2050 plan, the goals of the Scotch Whisky Association, they're sort of creating from the beginning a means of being more resourceful in their use of materials and water and so forth. New distilleries that are being built at the moment are all using the latest innovation and have environmental impact and efficiency as an important part of the design. Furthermore, there are multi-million-pound investments in a wide range of energy-efficient and low-carbon projects across the industry. The industry is also investing heavily in the reduction of fossil fuel use to meet the 2050 target of sourcing 80% of energy needed for the industry to come from non-fossil fuel. Many distilleries, such as Alberfeldy, have or are in the process of installing biomass boilers to replace fossil fuel energy sources on site. Despite the whiskey industry being full of competing companies, it seems that in every stage of production, up until sales and marketing, which is very competitive, the industry is very happy to collaborate and share knowledge as the greater good of the environment will benefit. If you can pick up a bottle of the Laphroaig 10 cask strength, particularly if you're an Islay lover, definitely. If you're a Laphroaig lover, definitely. An absolutely spectacular whiskey. Paid about $65 for it. Absolutely killer deal. I mean, great high quality price ratio. In addition to the complexity and the layers of flavor in this whiskey. So I highly, highly, highly recommend if you can get your hands on it. There can be, I would say, extremisms in just about anything. And there are environmental extremists. And so I'm very concerned about what we put into our air, what we put into our water, and how we treat this place that we're supposed to be living. Most of you know, I come from a wine background, 20 years in wine. And it's really, really evident in the vineyards, the impact that changes have on wine and the various climatic changes that we're going through. and what you do to the soil. What you do to the soil in a vineyard has a huge impact on wine, and so there is a growing organic and biodynamic movement within the whiskey industry, particularly in the vineyards. It's more important out in the vineyards, being much more organic, to have a healthy land, healthy soils, brings healthy vines, and healthy vines give you healthy wines. Well, same thing in the Scotch whiskey industry as well. If we want a long-term future for Scotch whiskey or bourbon or any other whiskeys, then we need to be good to the environment, so the environment will be good to us and how it's producing our whiskeys. Alrighty, I want to thank you very much for watching this video. If you subscribe to this channel, I want to thank you very much. If you haven't yet subscribed, would you like watching my videos? I would greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe. Give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, and other social networking channels. And don't forget to ring the bell to be notified when I go live or when I post new content. Alright, I have one more video in this series. We'll wrap it up and look at the future of the Scotch whiskey industry. Alright, until next time, cheers. Hey, if you like my review, be sure to check out these other whiskey videos.